and welcome to the 2022 Lean Higher Education Conference. Thank you for attending today's session, which will be merging mapping formats, value stream, and Swimlane components. And it will be run as a learning session, so this will be 45 minutes today. My name is Lauren Cairns, and my colleague here is Catherine Harris, and we are the co-hosts / moderators for this session. Just some quick housekeeping before we get started. Please keep yourself on mute unless you have a comment or question, and comments and questions can go in the chat. Otherwise, we will, should we save questions for the end, or do you want people to sort of pop their hand up? Or
I will pause every once in a while and ask if there's any questions. So if they could hold them to those points, it'd be great.
Fantastic. Without further ado, let me introduce our presenters for this session. This is Karen Kusler and Candice Beckman from the University of Texas, Arlington. Now over to our presenters for what I'm sure will be a wonderful session. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. We're excited to be here. And I know that everybody's here at different times of day. Some are early mornings, some are in the evenings. I'm just so excited to be part of the Lean HE conference again. I've had the privilege of going to a number of the conferences, and so it's always a great experience. I'm going to start my slide presentation. So, okay. Get things set up right here. Okay. Our presentation is on merging mapping formats. And when you talk about mapping formats, you can kind of guess there's going to be a lot of visual maps and such that's going to be presented. So we will have some opportunities for a little bit of discussion, but let me talk to you a little bit about how the presentation is going to flow. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reasons for our shifting in the way we're doing our mapping, and then a high-level overview of the mapping layouts and benefits. So I'll be sharing some different types of ways that it's being utilized, different formats that are traditional, and how we've adapted it. And then there will be an example of a case study of how we are layering maps that you use as you're facilitating with discussions, and talk about how you pull people in to those discussions. There'll be time at the end for Q&A, and I will stop periodically to see if you have any questions about the material that's already been presented. But mapping is all about trying to have something that's very visual for your project team to understand what's going on. And one of the things that we found is that we found some shifting happening. Now, we have this huge team of 3 people, myself, Candice, and Tabitha. And we get to work lots of different projects. We work under the umbrella of technology. And right now, OIT has around 100 projects on their books. We probably have 15 to 20 that's semi-active. Some of them are very active, and some of them we just come in and periodically. So there's a lot of different project work that's going on. And so we find that we're having to be very organized and be able to produce things. We're also having a lot of repeat teams working on projects, so having things that are very familiar for them to see from time to time. So we've tried to standardize our mapping procedure because of that. With the expansion of the enterprise systems, which has been a result of COVID, that we had all of these things that they wanted to put online. So we've had lots of expansion in, let's add this module to the enterprise system, and this module, or let's do this tool. And so we've had a number of changes there, and we need things to document for the process improvement. And then standard practices needed just for that project planning and documentation. We wanted things to be standardized. The last piece that's come in is supporting strategic efforts for departments and divisions. This is providing them these visual maps, but also helping them identify what processes they are responsible for. And I know that sounds weird, but some departments don't even have an idea of what processes they're responsible for. So giving them that kind of structure is one of the things we've started adding into our workload. And all these different shifts and major increase into technology projects on our plate. Some of them are not so much technology projects right now, but they will be in the end. We're involved with a discovery phase that's involving a lot of work with different audiences on, what technology is needed, and then it's going to result in technology. So it's just been a lot of shifting. We needed to find ways to be consistent, because there's times that I have to pull Candice off of something and put Tabitha on it, or I have to pick up midstream on a project just because of workloads. We have to have standards. So that's kind of where we came to. We've got to find ways to visualize with our maps and make them beneficial for the campus. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different types of mapping formats. Value stream mapping is one method, and you've heard a lot about it here because it is the traditional method for lean process improvement. It is what I learned with. I did not start doing swim lanes until I started at University of Texas in Arlington 5 years ago. And I've been doing process improvement since 2006. So I was doing just basic flow charts and value stream mapping. And then I go to an environment and they want swim lanes. And swim lanes are great. They provide a lot of information and they're very useful. But value stream mapping is this format where you basically have the task across the bottom. You have the customer, you have who are the suppliers, who the process owner is, and then you have the timeline of how much time it takes. And here's an example, and I know you can't read these. These are just to give you a layout of what the mapping formats look like. But the example that's showing all of the flows, the communication flows, we have Kaizens on here to show what changes are going to happen, and we have our timeline. And so value stream maps gives us lots of good information. It gives us these timelines that tells us some of the metrics that we need to use. Swim lanes, on the other hand, is more of identifying who is involved with those processes by building this pool and then adding all the different departments or positions that's tied to working this process. You easily can see the handoffs. You can see the types of tasks that are happening by each team and how they interact with the customer. But you don't get timelines in this. Journey maps is another map that's out there, and typically it's going to be either an individual or a group of individuals that's viewed as a persona. So with an individual, journey maps, where I learned journey maps was from marketing, and they focus on an individual of what kind of activities they had, what's their actions, what's the emotion to those actions, and then what kind of reference material might be tied to it. But you could do these with subgroups also, like first-time freshmen. First-time freshmen generally feel this way when they have to do these things, when they have to do certain tasks for financial aid or for admissions, okay? So those are 3 types of maps that if we could take the best things from each of those, it'd be great. Let me show you some examples of journey maps. This is one that we did, and it looks kind of messy, but was extremely useful. In fact, I did this in 2017, and I was asked to share it with someone 2 months ago because they were working on something and they wanted to look at the information from this map. So it ended up being very useful. It's the journey of students going through their whole career at the university. And this is just the one little section on admitted and being in the follow-up. So it was a huge map. And that's a whole different presentation, but it gives you the emotions of how they felt about these different types of activities. This one focused heavily on the website as to how well the website was meeting the needs of these tasks. And so we had references there. But this is an example from a marketing structure in that it's just one person, and then they talk about what they're doing and then how they feel. You can see the roller coaster down here. So journey maps gives us the emotions part. So how can we merge all of the good features of those maps into one tool to tell our story? So from value stream mapping, we want the customer, we want timeline, inventory, how much inventory there is and how much of a lag time there might be, communication lines. We're looking for the bottlenecks and the process time issues. For swim lanes, we're looking for the task ownership and the handoffs. And it's very effective for training tools and illustrating how that works with the technology and the between the different departments. The journey map is giving the customer perspective and the satisfaction levels. Where are we going to get the best payoff for what we want to improve? And then automation triggers is not really built into any of these, but it's very important as we work with technology projects. So these are all of the things that we've been trying to figure out. How can we package them in one map and make sense out of it all? So we worked on some of this, and Candice, and this is kind of what we are came up with in regards to, it's a swim lane format, but we have the customer swim lane, we have automation swim lane, we have our process pool with the different teams involved, and we have a timeline swim lane. And so this allows us, depending on what the project is, we put the timeline in there if it's important information we need. If it has automation with it, we build that into there. But we have all of the features that we need in there to be able to tell the full story. So as we layer our maps, we're looking at 6 different areas, and we're going to illustrate these so that you'll have an idea of what we're working toward. We look at the current state map of capturing that current state flow, what the automation is and what the timeline is. We look for what the value is, looking at each of those tasks as to which ones add value. We look for the waste. What is the waste for the business value and the non-value added labels? We don't worry so much about the value labels, because if they're marked as a value label, there should not be any waste there. Kaizen is notation of what the potential solutions are, is where we layer that on. Then we start with that future state discussion, gaining agreement on that future state flow. We illustrate how we show that. Then it's that redrawing of the map. And those of you who have been working with mapping from the current state to the future state, sometimes you throw everything out the window and you have to redraw that future state map from scratch. Sometimes it's just readjusting a current state. So it all depends on what it is as to how much change you have to make. So these are the different layers that we have found to be important. And by distinguishing all 6 layers, we get good discussion, rich discussion of what the real issues are with the process. So I want to pause here for a moment and see if anybody has any questions about the 3 mapping formats I quickly went through. and then what we're going to focus on next with these layers of creating process maps. And feel free to come off and just ask your question or make your comment, or you can put it in the chat.
There's one in the chat here.
Okay.
From Maria. Do you use any software for the mapping?
We use Visio is the software we use, but you could use Lucid Charts. You could use whatever you choose to. When I started mapping, I used to use iGraphic, which is not a very good tool for a university because you have to buy individual license and then nobody else can access it and such. So it's not the best tool, but even though it's very powerful. But we use Visio. We're a Microsoft campus and we tend to use that suite of tools. Okay. All right. So Candice is going to talk.
We just have one more question, if that's all right.
Yes.
Can we include KPIs in the mapping?
You could. You could, and I'll talk a little bit about that as I get into the example, if that's all right.
Yeah,
okay.
No worries.
So Candice is going to kind of go through how we develop our Visio stencil and then the first few layers of the map.
Right. Thanks, Karen. So as Karen said, we use Visio. So we have pulled together some of the components from the business process mapping notation standard, as well as your basic flowchart standards, and then value stream components, and then just some special shapes on here that you'll see. So we have the standard. This is what our team uses, and then groups like our business analysts and things on campus that also map, we're also starting to share this with them because they are finding value in the maps that we give them for their technical work, and they want to utilize some of the same standards. We can go ahead to the next slide, Karen. So moving through these layers, we'll go through, this is an example map, and we'll go through each of those 6 layers. But first we start with that current state. And on here you can see this is a process for new hire system onboarding. So we have the new hire accepting their offer, and then we show the flow and the handoffs of have all their documentation been submitted. If not, it goes back up to the new hire. And then the back office and supporting systems here. So the hiring department, the human resource records division, and then the timeline on the bottom to measure how long those individual tasks take. And then what are we looking at long term? How long does it actually take to do this onboarding activity? That automation lane there shows a lot of those touch points and the systems that connect throughout this process. So we capture a current state and get agreement on the fact that this is the way things are, and we're in agreement that they exist. And this is how the process works a majority of the time.
Now, we know we're always using different acronyms and such, so we do provide them a legend to understand what the colors mean. We do process demand notations up here as to what is the intake. And about the only thing, we're not as good as University of Michigan of getting that baseline metrics. We're trying harder, but we can get demand of the traffic of the process. So this is kind of what we focus on. This particular map is showing that we have, and I realize all of this is too small. When you get the PowerPoint, you can zoom in and be able to read it so you can follow it. But it's showing that you have 4.3 hours of process time and 4.5 days just to do this from accepting the offer to getting them in the system. And so, you know, that's a long time just to do that small process. Okay.
Great. So the next thing we do is we begin to assess value in the process. So we add these circles on, green for value added, yellow for business value, and red for there's no value in that step. So we systematically go through with the project teams and we label each box on this map, whether it's valuable or not.
Okay.
The next step in our third layer is we then go back through those and we use the acronym Wisdom 2. You may know it as downtime, but we use the 8 categories of waste. So we use the wisdom to change and we call out what those wastes are. And we focus in the non-value and business value added sections. As Karen said, we don't so much focus initially on those value added activities. Sometimes there is waste occurring there. If there is, we will call it out so that we can work to reduce it. But we call out those less valuable activities so we can really focus on reducing and or eliminating them.
We use this little triangle for our inventory symbol. And so we have 2 points here in the timeline where we're getting a lot of inventory. This inventory could also be noted up here in the task boxes. This map, we just simply put it down in the timeline that's where the bottlenecks are happening. You'll see that we have little I dots here, which is just basic information. It's kind of a notation of this is important for you to understand of this section of the map. Or we may have a question that we have, and this is an indication of next time we meet with the team, this is a question we need to answer regarding this map. But by going through all of these different layers, we get a lot of discussion about, does this have any waste, or is it a business value? And what is the waste? This is motion. This is sources not being utilized. And so it's not always just, there's errors, but it's more of let's dig a little deeper. What is the waste? There can be more than one kind of waste for a different task box. We tend to try to focus on the primary one.
So Karen, we've got a question in the chat before we move to the next slide.
Right.
It says, do you combine all of the processes together for specialists in the organization? Like information management, flow of information in the organization, or applications?
Say that again. I'm not sure I understood it.
Yeah, do you mind coming off mute and giving us a little bit more clarification on that question?
Yes, of course. Now, I was just wondering, because we are struggling with that, with our information managers, business analysts, we try to combine the processes now. So that you can, because you have like a million processes in the organization.
So you have your technical maps over here, right? You have your technical maps and you have your process maps, which is 2 different things. It took a while for us to get the team at the campus to understand. We don't do technical maps. We do process maps. We focus on how the people are moving through the process. So we don't try to merge the technical maps, which gets more into you're going to this system and you need to be on this screen and all of those different flows. How those would connect is through the automation stops that we have noted here. They could use this automation flow to start building their technical maps. But they're doing behind the scenes, and this is focused on the people aspect. Excellent question. Excellent. That makes sense, though? But we're finding that they really like this. We're doing a lot of building of new forms, and this helps identify where there's going to be different automation stops. What's the value of that automation stop? And but then the business analyst has to go and do the rest of it of where's the source for all of these different email addresses that's going to be sent and so on. We don't try to build that into this.
Yeah, and we've got one more question here, Karen, on the difference between business value and value. So Krista, for that, we measure value as something that the customer desires and they see value in it. business value, and higher ed a lot of times is we have a legal requirement or we have a business function that we have to perform, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to that product or service that's being delivered by the process.
We do a lot of things to be ready for audits in higher ed. And typically they'll show up at some point, but we have to capture information that wouldn't necessarily be captured, except we have to do that for audit purposes. Every time I work with the inventory process, I just get so frustrated because the level of detail they go into that's unnecessary for items that are low dollar is just I shake my head, but it's all because of the state requirements with the audits. Okay. And we didn't really talk much about the wisdom to change. Downtime is used often. Tim Woods is used. We like wisdom too, and it's something that a colleague and I kind of came up with because it's a more positive attitude about we're going to make a change and we're going to have the wisdom to make that change. And you'll find that all of the categories of waste is represented here, but just with a different, some of them are different words. Defects in inventory and weighting are all the same. So, okay. So then we start moving into the Kaizen layer. The Kaizen layer is where we're starting to talk with them about what can we make changes, what are issues that we need to consider. We often will have a whole lot more red question marks on here because we may have 2 or 3 meetings on this. Just to talk about what are our opportunities. And so I use the little Kaizen burst. And in general, we tend to use this, but sometimes we will build it where it's just the question marks and we just keep going with the question marks until we get it to the decision. But I like to have the Kaizen burst because it draws our attention of, hey, we've got all of these red dots over here. We've got to do something to fix them. Look at all the red and the yellow here. What can we do to fix this area? So by putting the color coding in of the value added and what the different waste is, it helps us identify just where we need to focus our attention. And then with the future states discussion, we've had our Kaizens and we're starting to look at what steps do we eliminate, what steps do we change, how do we change them, and so we start just making marks, using big red X's for steps that are just going to completely go away. This particular process for when you can go in and zoom in, and originally I was going to go into Visio so I could zoom in and all, but for ease of purpose, we'll just do it this way. But when you can zoom in, you'll see that some of the things that we're Xing out is duplication of records that don't need to be stored in the department and at the division and in HR. They just need to be accessible from one location. We don't need to be sending things via email. We need to be uploading them into a shared location. And so that's where a lot of that change is. Okay. And then you come out, once you get all that clutter out, you have your nice, clean future state map that can be used for training purposes. And you can see that our little ideas, I've put it in blue here to emphasize that these are things that have been somewhat changed and issues that they might consider. But we didn't get rid of the inventory down here per se. We are hopeful that it will not occur, but we still note here that there's potential bottleneck at these 2 spots, so that as the business owner is working this process in the future, they know where they need to focus to make sure that things are taken care of. You'll see that we still have 2 circles on here for business value. And these are defects that have to be dealt with because it's things that might occur that need to be corrected. But we go ahead and leave that on there so it's clear to know that, hey, this is not the normal process. It's not the best pass through this process. We have our timeline that shows how much time it's going to take. And with our estimates of the new process, we have 3.38 hours, saving about an hour, and 2 days, saving 2.5 days in the process. And that's with still having some lag time that hopefully could be reduced in the future. So you can see how all 6 layers just builds on to previous discussions with, now we're going to talk about this next concept of process improvement. How does this process relate to it? Any questions on this part? Is anything showing in the chat?
Not at this stage.
Okay, let me share with you some more examples of how you might do different timelines and different mapping structures. We want to tell the story very visually. We want to package the features that are dependent on each other. So we have the timelines and the automation touches and the departments that are working with it. So they have an understanding of where they're going to be impacted and at what point. So this is an example of a map where we're using icons for meanings, but we don't want to make it cluttered. This is a map that we did early on as we were evolving to this mapping format. Candice created this one. I just love this map, but it's for when students were quarantined with COVID on campus. And we had all these different activities that need to happen. So we had that they had to move to the quarantine location. We had to have some testing done. We had to get them keys. We had to provide them food. We had to do laundry. And so having these icons helped the individuals who were involved with working with these students know right where they needed to go to see what their steps were. So instead of having a checklist, they had this map to refer to as to what they needed to be doing. And it worked extremely well. In fact, it brought us so much more business. We've been doing lots of work with student housing and student services since we did this work on this map. Candice, do you have anything you want to add on this?
Sure, yeah. Not only was this map just useful, but because of the time we were in, we didn't have time to make tons of maps. So this served as just training for the university staff, which is kind of where the importance of adding the icons came from, because there were different groups that were handling meals. And there were different people at the information desk. There was different people handling trash service and laundry service. So this helped them visually clue in on their area once they were familiar with it.
Good. We have 3 different group activities: move in, quarantine, and move out. And so it was a very useful map. It was very successful. When we look at timelines, we want to provide detail that makes sense. We want it to make sense if you're looking at 2 years from now. As I said, that journey map that I actually pulled out that was 5 years old, it seems to still make sense to those people. And so providing details that make sense if it's reviewed in the future. This particular timeline is one that you just have the little radio buttons and you show the lag time and what the tasks are in between. But it's showing that there's 4.5 days total time on this timeline. Whereas this timeline is illustrating the impact of when timing activities have to occur. It's showing when the weekends are happening, so you don't have that time to work, but you also have these red times when the system is unavailable to do the work. And so it's only the black and those that have no distinctive deadline, like 2 days here and then here, that you actually have time to do the work. So this particular one is about having a deadline of having an employee performance action form completed. And they're fussing because people aren't getting them done. Well, look, they get the people hired here, and you only have like 3 days to get it processed of working days. And so this shows that issue there. And I just zoomed in for a small piece of it, so you don't see the whole piece of it. But have any of you used timelines with your maps that you might share how you've used them? Okay. And you saw the traditional timeline of the value stream map, which is showing your process time on the what I call the peak, and then the valley is showing your lag time. The automation, we've already talked quite a bit about it, but it's looking at what are the different stops, labeling those stops. And with this one, I showed that this is what initiates it, and then it starts going through the gold stops. And then the blue is a manual notification of a related task, but it's not part of the automation. Okay. Always include legends. And then we also look at the maps providing the resources that is needed to address the process. This is an example of one of our offboarding sub-processes. We have an offboarding process that's being worked on right now, and it's going to end up with about 25 departments being touched to offboard an employee. And when you stop and think, you know, they got to turn their computer in, they got to turn their keys in. Yeah, that's about it. We're fine. We don't have too much to do. Well, the reality is that there's a whole lot. So what we've done is we've created this for the business owner of that process to know what each department is going to be doing and who the contacts are, what's the email that's used in the system, and what are the different tasks they're accomplishing. And then a very high level map of what they will do that might have some timing in it. This particular one is showing that they capture documentation of the employee, and then they have to come back after that employee is termed and verify that everything did get turned off and they no longer have access. But the vice president of this area was very happy with this map because she said, this is easy for me to understand what they're doing. Okay. So we've talked about how we're blending all of these different types of components from different maps into one. You may find there are other components of maps that you think would be useful in your area that you want to blend. And we are very happy to help you with any of this, share examples or anything at all. But that's basically it. Any other questions?
No, I did see Kevin had a comment in the chat that he does maps in the time order, but hasn't applied or notated the actual length of that time there.
Okay. I do not use Zoom enough. I'm trying to find where I stopped sharing. There we go. I was lost. Has this been useful for you? Have you found some ideas of how you might enhance your mapping and your facilitation?
Yeah. Julie, would you care to share a little bit more on your comment there?
Yes, you know, I'm really liking the way you've got that map drawn out. And the one part of our organization that's done the most mapping has been our comptroller's office. And they've got multiple diagrams that they're very proud of, and they go into the detail to where they are satisfying their financial auditors. So when the auditor says, well, how do you do X, Y, and Z, and how do you ensure you've got segregation of duties? They can pull out flow charts that look somewhat like this, but they go into the details that would satisfy a financial auditor. And then to get it all to fit on only 3 pages, they have it looping back on itself multiple times. And as we're thinking about moving into, an ERP system upgrade in a few years, I'm thinking, and how am I going to help them shift their mindset that there's a different way to map, and it's got a different approach and a different, they're brilliant because they appreciate the value of mapping, but they know mapping their way. Any insight on how you would tackle a group like that?
Maybe show them some of the different layers they might add on to it, and see if they will find value, asking them some of the questions about what else would be valuable for you to visualize. And then you identify what might be layered in there. We've been getting some requests for compliance that's tied to audits, mainly with security audits and such, doing mapping for those things. And so it is really important to have those things that you can show the auditor, yes, we have a plan. We know our process. This is how it's consistently done.
And as you started,
auditor goes and tries to see if they really are doing it, but that's a different story.
So as you were looking to map it for like the compliance from a security perspective, did you find it fit into the format well enough?
Yeah, there is some, because with compliance, there's some timeline things. So the timeline's been very important in that, because if it's when we have incidents with security issues that we're having to defend with audits, and we need to show that we're responding within the designated standard, the SLO. What does that stand for? Standard. Come on, Nolan. What is it?
Is it the SLA? Is that what you said?
SLA. That's it. I said
Service
SLA.
level agreement.
Yes, service level agreement. Acronyms, I hate them. Okay, good.
Well, we've just got a minute left. Sorry, Karen. Are there any other questions that are coming through in the chat? I see a lot of love for the presentation. Lots of thank yous. People are inspired, thinking about how they're going to do things differently in the future.
Thank you so much for the kind comments. We were hoping this would be useful to share, and we've been excited about. Tabitha came on board about a 6-7 months ago, and she's finding that this structure is very helpful to not have to figure out her mapping format, and it adapts to higher ed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much to Karen and Candice for an enlightening presentation.